Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another interview of mine, and I'm extremely happy to be getting Dane Wigington on my channel for the very first time. Couldn't do a video interview because he lives in a very remote area of California, but I was able to get an audio interview with him, and he just lays down the facts on geoengineering and solar radiation management. You might have heard those concepts sometimes being termed as chemtrails, but it's actually more technically known as geoengineering, and we talk about that specification in this interview. He also lays down a lot of new research and new progress into exposing the geoengineering phenomena. And it's a great interview, great interview. I think you guys are really going to like it. Dane Wigington is just one of my favorite speakers there is because of how clear and concise he is. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. Dane, thank you so much for coming on here with me today. How are you doing?
Good, Jordan. Thank you for having me and your willingness to address this critical issue of climate engineering.
Absolutely. So getting into this topic, for those of my listeners that aren't familiar with you and your work and your history in the geoengineering subject, how did you get into it all, and how did you come to find the reality of these trails being laid above us?
Well, it's something that, my background with Bechtel Power, that I would have thought would have been on my radar sooner, but I moved to the Pacific Northwest to try to find clean air. I grew up in a very smoggy Southern California, built a large off-grid home, solar, hydro, and wind power, and I immediately began to notice very drastic drops in my solar PV uptake on days that had no natural cloud cover. It was the spreading, expanding emissions from jet aircraft, and this was certainly perplexing to lose, in some days, 60, 70, 80% of my solar PV uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting. I began to research, Jordan, found mountains of data on geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, describing exactly what I was seeing in the skies above. Looked for the primary elements listed in climate engineering patents, starting with aluminum. Found those elements in precipitation tests, which are a very good indicator of what is in the air column. Subsequent testing revealed skyrocketing levels of those elements, and after enough research, there was no denying the fact that climate engineering was indeed occurring in the skies above us. And once one realizes the ramifications of this, just couldn't turn away. My life's never been the same since. This is all I've done for the last 15 years.
And then you began to research the ideas of geoengineering and solar radiation management. But a lot of people tend to term this as chemtrails. That's the colloquial nomenclature of it. Can you talk to me for a second the important distinction between the two?
It's extremely important, and we have example after example after example of people who try to speak out on this issue being instantly marginalized because they use the non-science chemtrails term. There's no scientific basis to that term, Jordan. Some claim that there's an Air Force manual that proves that term is valid. The manual in question that has the chemtrails term on it has nothing to do with climate engineering. It's a first-year cadet chemistry course. It has nothing to do with this subject. So again, if you want credibility, if you want to help in this fight, this critical fight to expose and halt climate engineering, imperative to use the science terms which lead people to science and solid data. And we can't be marginalized that way. So again, the media, every single time, people like Kaylee Jenner, or we have Prince, who's now no longer with us, but we have others that have used that term, and they were immediately marginalized because of that term. So this is semantics. We're playing a game of semantics. Semantics do matter. We need to play chess effectively, use the science terms if you really want to help in this battle.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the Air Force manual that mentioned chemtrails, quote, that had nothing to do with the geoengineering topic. What data and evidence have you found from actual government agencies that describe geoengineering, and how far back have you found data?
Certainly the amount of documents that we have, and some of those are, in one case, a Senate document nearly 800 pages long, indicates these programs were deployed immediately after World War II. They've been going on that long. And we have global temperature records that would indicate the initial effect of those programs as well. We had rapidly escalating temperatures leading up to World War II. All recognized data graphing reflects this. Immediately after World War II, there was an unexplainable leveling off of those temperatures. The initial geoengineering was deployed over the polar regions. The power structures don't take into account the consequences of their actions. If they are able to initiate an engineered cooling effect on the planet, to them that's success, and the downstream effects are irrelevant to them, just like detonating 2,000 nuclear bombs all over the globe. That's success to them, even though that contaminated the entire planet. So we see a leveling off of temperatures from about 1945 to 1975 as the ozone depletion increased, geoengineering being a primary cause, not CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, disruption of the hydrological cycle, the dying of the forests, ocean stratification. All these negative effects begin to kick in. The temperatures begin to go up again, and what does the power structure do? They double down. They simply double down over and over and over. They're too invested to turn back now. And Jordan, to be clear to your listeners, geoengineering is an experiment from which there is no return. The damage is irreparable in countless ways. And we now have the science community, the betrayal of the science community, betrayal of the human race and the entire web of life, pretending that we have some last-ditch alternative to stave off a planetary meltdown. But that, in fact, is a lie, because climate engineering card was played 70 years ago. In regard to the data, I'll give you a little bit of breaking news on this program, and I'll elaborate more on my weekly broadcast this week. But we're suing the U.S. Department of Commerce, who is the overseeing agency for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Wow.
We've been promised 7,000 documents. The court has ordered NOAA to give us 7,000 documents that NOAA now claims to have. In fact, the first Freedom of Information Act we sent directly to NOAA before we had to sue, NOAA claimed they didn't know anything about any weather modification program anywhere ever. Obviously a blatant, glaring lie. Now, after we sue the DOC, now NOAA says, oh, we have 7,000 documents we found. Then they've tried to drag their feet in releasing those documents. We were promised 1,400 per month starting April 6th. We got nothing. April 13th, we were told we would get documents again. We got nothing. Now, out of the 1,400 that they have assured us they would release at the beginning of April, we were just given 7 documents. 7 out of 14. 7 documents out of 1,400, which is only a fraction of the 7,000 we were ordered to be given. And those 7 documents are completely redacted. Nothing on them. This is the world we live in. A total cover-up in a government that is completely criminal. So again, we're back to critical mass awareness. I'll give this back to you, but we are fighting as hard as we can through every single channel to bring these programs to life. But it takes people like you and others to help get this information out, help encourage people to pick up this torch and carry it themselves, share credible data, help us expose this issue. If we can expose it, we have a chance of stopping it.
Wow, so there is some serious foot dragging going on by the power structures, as you're saying. And one thing I have noticed, though, recently is the idea of geoengineering hitting the mainstream, being talked about on, I think I saw an article on The Guardian and others in serious mainstream journals discuss this issue, yet you're saying it's been done since World War II. There's thousands of documents the government has, they just won't release. So why are we seeing the idea being talked about on the mainstream level?
As if it's only a proposal. Because that pacifies people. It pacifies the population, even though they can see it with their own eyes. And the geoengineering elephant in the room couldn't get much bigger. We live on a planet now that looks like something completely different than what we've known. Driving a by-5 yesterday, it looked like another planet, a different planet. The sky completely plastered from horizon to horizon, a completely white canopy over everything. And people go on about their lives as if there's nothing wrong. They will not have that option for much longer. And I don't care who rolls their eyes and walks away at that statement that this is alarmism. It's not alarmism. It's a mathematical certainty. We are seeing, again, a complete collapse of ecosystems, biological or wildlife populations, global wildlife populations, aquatic life populations. So our current reality, I can say with complete certainty, short of some unforeseen and unknown factor that likely doesn't exist, we are going to hit the wall soon at full velocity. If there's one quantum leap we could take in the right direction, again, it's to expose climate engineering, because if we can expose it, we can halt it.
Great. And two quick questions. I'm sure they can go far longer than we have time for. But what is in these geoengineering trails that are left in the sky? You mentioned aluminum. I've heard barium, strontium, and some other things. So to the best of your knowledge, what have you found in them? What do you think's in them? And also, what is the goal of them? Or not necessarily the goal, but what are they actually doing? How are they affecting the global cool down and the weather patterns?
Let's break this down. Those are all good questions. First, let's look at what do we know these dispersions consist of. And there are elements certainly that we cannot know yet, but aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, lead, polymer fibers, all of these are listed in patents. These elements have shown up in our lab testing, which we've done in numerous locations from around the globe. We've done a lot of testing in Northern California because a lot of aerosol operations take place over California, because that's where the moisture moves in to the continent, if you will. Now, these particles, why would they use aluminum? Many would ask that. We have film footage of the world's most recognized geoengineers like Dr. David Keith from Stanford stating why aluminum is preferred, why it's on the patents, because it has a high albedo. That's a reflectivity. What's the goal with solar radiation management? To put a reflective layer of particles in the atmosphere to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, the heat energy. But in doing so, no consideration of the consequences of those particles has been taken into account. There's been no environmental impact reports, no public disclosure. So aluminum is utilized because it's a high reflectivity and a low coagulation rate. The particles don't clump together, so they stay aloft longer. But again, no regard for the consequences. And your listeners can look up a very short video, Jordan. If they search Dane Wigington, David Keith, they'll see me confronting Dr. Keith at an international geoengineering conference, where when I asked Dr. Keith, had any toxicological studies been done, after trying to evade the question, he finally admitted, no, nothing. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. And shouldn't that be alarming from the world's most recognized geoengineer? So we have these particles that are, again, useful for, in their eyes, for solar radiation management, but also these electrically conductive particles, Jordan, ionize the atmosphere. They make it electrically conductive. And that opens up a whole nother arena of agendas for the military-industrial complex. Over-the-horizon radar, DARPA weapons, environmental modification weapons, communications. So there's a great deal going on all at once. And in regard to, just to make this clear for your listeners, in regard to the weather modification as a whole, these programs are not benevolent in any way, shape, or form. This is about power and control, not about the greater good. So for those who would like to convince themselves if our government's doing it, it must be necessary, absolutely not true. It's virtually tearing apart the entire web of life and toxifying every single breath we take. Nothing benevolent in these programs.
My God, quick note before I want you to talk a little bit about what they're actually doing. Just think of spraying aluminum over a population. You think of aluminum being the toxic heavy metal it is, it's going to absolutely destroy our nervous systems. So just countless health effects just on humans, let alone the biosphere, like you've been talking about. So it blows my mind that they wouldn't do that.
Isn't that exactly what we see? We see epidemic levels of every human disease we would expect to see. We see
autism, Alzheimer's, you've got neurodevelopmental dysfunction. It's amazing.
Everything. So although we have obviously other sources of those elements that are doing damage, mathematically speaking, again, when we have the world's most recognized geoengineers like David Keith and the exchange that I just referred to, they're stating their goal of putting 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates in the atmosphere annually. That should be unimaginably alarming to people. And we're talking again about nanoparticulates. The smaller the particle, the more harmful they are, the more easily they are absorbed, the more bioavailable they are. So in the case of these particulates that likely range from 20 to 50 nanometers, those are absorbed in the olfactory nerve as they are breathed into nasal passages. They go straight into the bloodstream. They easily cross the blood-brain barrier. We're talking about what amounts to biological warfare. Whatever the agenda is, this amounts to biological warfare. There's no debating that rationally. So again, and there may be other agendas there that we can all speculate about. I mean, does that serve the power structure of the population as less cognitively functional, less able to connect the dots? I would argue absolutely it serves the population. We can look at other aspects, fluoridation of water, and you mentioned GMOs, another problem, but from every direction, this sort of these debilitating processes are being inflicted on the population, but climate engineering is the crown jewel, if you will. And if the population, this should be considered, if the population wakes up enough and becomes enough of a threat to the power structure, should we think or believe for a moment that they wouldn't alter that mix to make it even more lethal and level the playing field anytime they want? They're already dispersing toxic materials. If those are made more toxic, game over. And on that note, for those who think our government wouldn't do that, a couple more fun facts, and I'll give this back to you. As of 1977, we had historical data proving the government up to that point, not counting the last decade since then, but up to 1977, there were 239 documented cases of the U.S. government doing biological testing on innocent U.S. civilians. 239 cases. We have the second most recognized geoengineer in the world, Ken Caldera from Stanford, stating on the record what he did for the government, our government, the United States government, was to design pathogens that could be sprayed into clouds to infect the populations below. And him stating that in his own words is available on geoengineeringwatch.org. That audio is available. So I'm not speculating on this. So again, what we face is incredibly dire. It's important people understand that.
I love how well sourced everything you have is. You are pointing directly to the evidence. And what have you found data wise of the effect of these geoengineering programs on the weather patterns? What do they actually do rather than what they tell us they're supposed to do?
That's a great question also, Jordan. What we see is a global climate system that at this point is completely derailed. We can see no natural weather formation. We examine NASA satellite imagery every day from all over the globe, and there's literally nothing there that could be considered a natural storm formation, weather formation. All is tainted, and the weather system is very malleable anyway. So even the smaller scale weather modification programs potentially disrupt the entire downstream chain. But now we're talking about a total global saturation of these particulates. In fact, the term global dimming, which many are not familiar with, refers to the amount of direct sunlight that no longer reaches the surface as compared to 5 decades ago. And those figures vary between 20 and 30%. And your listeners will find sources that deny everything I'm saying. They're invested in denying it. And for many people who want to believe the lie, if they find that kind of source, even though they can look up and see, obviously there's not much blue sky left anywhere, those that want to believe the lies will deny even what they can see with their own eyes. But we have global dimming that gives some idea of the totality of weather disruption, back to your original question, that's going on. So 20 to 30% of the sun's direct rays no longer reaching the surface alters everything from convection, low and high pressure formation, the hydrological cycle. It's completely derailed and disrupted. So the answer to that is it's altered everything, Jordan. No one knows. No one, I don't care what their position or their credentials, knows what will happen in any certainty when these programs are halted. But there's an immense amount of energy built up in the system. The planet is warming currently at the thermal energy increase rate of 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs per second. That's 400,000 per day. Your listeners can look up anything I'm stating. So again, the attempt to mask that with a reflective shield only furthers the energy buildup, only furthers the degrading of the planet's natural life support systems and the equilibrium, the energy balance. So we are completely, the final answer to your question, we are completely in uncharted territory.
We are, truly. And how is this tying into the cool downs, to the polarization of temperatures we're seeing? We're seeing one extreme here, one extreme here. I mean, how do these programs affect that, to the best of your knowledge?
This is an important question because many, even who know climate engineering is occurring, are not acknowledging the engineered cool downs. And these are patented processes in the case of what's called chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. And we have one of the primary patents posted in entirety at geoengineeringwatch.org. And this is a process by which endothermic, i.e. energy absorbing materials, are seeded into cloud cover in massive quantities. And that causes nucleation at temperatures far higher than it should occur. And that doesn't actually create more cold on the planet overall. It simply borrows that energy, if you will. It's an offsetting or a rearranging of that energy so that they can create a cold surface layer. Cool air descends to the surface, and thus we have the extreme, Jordan, you must have seen some of this on some news broadcast, the extreme weather whiplash scenarios. It'll go from 80 degrees to snow and back to 80 degrees the next day.
Yeah.
So this is a direct result of engineered cool downs. And this is imperative to recognize this because this is a major aspect of climate engineering. So we just posted an article on, I believe, Monday at geoengineeringwatch.org that documented a completely anomalous and meteorologically unprecedented flow of moisture that, again, is a creation of climate engineering because, and this is another subject we can go into in a moment, with radio frequency microwave transmissions like ionosphere heaters, like HARP, which many of your listeners may have heard of. Mm-hmm. They can create high and low pressure zones, and they can actually orchestrate and create the kind of flow of moisture we just saw flowing directly from the south to the north, a direct north-south line, a river of moisture. This scenario was unprecedented. From the Caribbean, warm moisture from the Caribbean flowing straight from south to north to the Great Lakes region where it magically turns into a snowstorm. And we had 70 degrees, almost 70, and rain at Detroit, and you could throw a stone and hit snow. This is meteorologically impossible without climate engineering. So chemical ice nucleation, again, the seeding of the clouds with these endothermic energy-absorbing materials can create a snowstorm out of what should have been precipitation. The Chinese government openly announced they were doing this. Your listeners can also look that up. If they search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorm, they did. Even Fox News and Popular Science even covered that, Jordan. So they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing, and then they began to go underground with these programs because the population obviously wasn't happy. So I'm pointing out, back to, again, your original question, there is no natural weather at this point, none. And those who would dispute or deny this, and especially those in academia, Jordan, who at this point are, with very few exceptions, little more than paid liars. That's exactly what they are. And they should be exposed as such. They should be exposed as accomplices in the climate engineering cover-up. But those who would deny this are simply reading a script that's given to them by the weather makers. And to add to that statement, we have all the weather modeling being done for National Weather Service and NOAA is done by Raytheon, primary geoengineering contractor. We have the Foxes running a hen house. All the weather modeling and forecasts for the FAA are done by Lockheed Martin, also a major geoengineering contractor. So we're living in the Truman Show, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Or Twilight Zone, the Matrix.
Exactly.
Great. I think that's all I really wanted to cover. Is there anything else that you wanted to go through?
Well, if I may, the radio frequency microwave transmissions that I mentioned a moment ago, Jordan, for those, again, there's many profound challenges that we face, and they are valid. Those fighting against the smart meters and the radio frequency cell phone transmissions and so forth, those are all valid battles. But I would point out that those transmissions being used for climate engineering are exponentially more powerful and more dangerous. And we have the same facilities being used for those transmissions. So what people mistakenly believe are only a cell phone repeating tower, if you will, we know the service entrances, the electrical service supply for those towers is 10 times greater than they need for cell phone repeating. And we know those towers are being used for the manipulation of the particles in the atmosphere. when you, Jordan, you've seen if you put iron shavings on a table, you put a magnet below it, you'll see how they arrange, correct? Based on the flux lines from the magnet. Same thing happens with the microwave radio frequency transmissions. And these are the herringbone patterns or perfectly uniform rib patterns people see in the sky. It's the way they manipulate the particulates. So they can, as they disperse these particulates, they can further enhance their ability to scatter those particulates by exposure to radio frequency. This is how they can disband rain. For example, coming over the West Coast, we see heavy seeding, and the rain is scattered because there's too many condensation nuclei, too many particulates. They're scattered further with the radio frequency transmissions, and they can migrate massive rainless cloud cover further inland, and that's part of solar radiation management. So,
wow. Hearing you explain the whole process, I get this visualization of exactly how they're doing it when they spray, and then they use the frequencies to push it inward. Fascinating there.
Correct. And so those frequencies, again, immensely harmful. And when we're fighting radio frequencies, we must consider climate engineering. And I hope those that are, again, justly fighting the smart meters and other aspects of the RF radio frequency microwave dangers, we must look at climate engineering as well. And the overall ramifications, again, to the biosphere. We're electrical organisms. Life is electrical. When you interfere with these processes by this electrosmog that we're all swimming in, and then you consider the saturation of the breathable air column with the toxic particulates, the toxification of soils and waters, and we have peer-reviewed study, Jordan, to prove the effects of the bioavailable metals on root systems. You and I off the air discussed the tree die-off, which is happening all over the globe. Mm-hmm. So we know in the case of the trees, again, they're being fried by the UV from the destruction of the ozone layer, which is most primarily related to climate engineering. They're dying from the root systems because of the bioavailable metals. We have the disruption of the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, so they're dying from drought. And we have a more electrically conductive atmosphere, so we have more lightning with less rain, i.e. more fires. And we have the incendiary dust from these particulates, which cover the foliage of forests and cause even more intense burning. No forest, no people, no ocean, aquatic insect, and that portion of the web of life. If the oceans die, we die. Trees die, we die. Atmosphere stops functioning, we die. The list goes on. But in so many of these cases, Jordan, the road leads back to climate engineering, and not to say that that's the only foe we face, if you will. We've been horrible stewards of the planet. I think you would agree with that, correct?
I would.
And there's too many categories there to even begin to go into. But all that being said, the single greatest assault would have to be considered climate engineering, Jordan. And that's why we're focused on this. And if I could finish with this, for those who feel powerless against this, they are not. Each of us could make an immense difference if we simply went about it in the right way. And sharing credible data is key. It's much more powerful when you can hand somebody data with NASA images, documents, and hard information that they can actually try to absorb. That's much more effective than pointing at the sky and ranting. So I would encourage people to share credible data from a credible source. We try to provide that at geoengineeringwatch.org for the cost of the materials only, so that people don't have to try to print their own. But the primary objective here is to expose this issue. If we can expose it, our military brothers and sisters understand what they're participating in, what other contractors like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, their employees, if they realize that they're participating in their own demise. We must reach that point. That's our only means of stopping these programs from the inside out, if you will.
Wow, Dane, thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you've shared with me today. All the links to Geoengineering Watch websites and articles will be down below this video. And people can go find you, geoengineeringwatch.org. Are there any other places you want to mention here?
Our site, again, we're a data repository, no politics, no advertising. So whatever side of the political fence people are on, it doesn't really matter. And in the bigger picture, of course, that doesn't matter anyway. But we simply try to be a data repository so people can have the ammunition they need to wake those up around them. So we'll continue to do everything we can to sound the alarm, to provide the best, most effective materials people can use to circulate and help wake those up around them. And if we all participated in this, Jordan, you know the mathematical equation. If you woke 2 people up at the beginning of a 30-day month and those two each the second day and so forth, you're into the many millions by the end of only 30 days. If we all pull together, we could still affect the flavor of what we face. We're in for immense challenges under any scenario. But again, if there's the single greatest leap we could take in the right direction would be to expose and halt climate engineering. And that would drag so much to the surface with it when people realize that they've been forced to be a test subject and an experiment from which there is no return. And we need people to understand that. The challenge we face with climate engineering is existential. It's our collective futures that are at stake here, Jordan.
And it may seem completely overwhelming and completely scary, but one thing I like to do is visualize that world that we get once all of this stuff is cleaned up and we actually get these programs exposed and get rid of them.
I agree. Our intent is very important, and people should never underestimate their ability to affect the equation if they simply start marching in the right direction. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, correct, Jordan?
Correct.
So we start moving that direction. And I would argue to put one foot on that path is to have arrived. The journey is the destination. So again, if we know we're waking people up behind the scenes, and this is what I just described, to add a little credence to that, I just had a long conversation with a former member of the Senate Armed Services Committee committee in DC. I'm communicating now with 3 former U.S. military generals. We are waking people up, but this is back to the effort from each and every one of us to spread awareness wherever we're at, hold viewings. We have very extensive presentations on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch that anybody can use. I Skype into events often to answer questions. All of us need to pull together and share that credible data. If we do so, we are getting much, much closer to critical mass. The effort, again, will take all of us, Jordan.
Thank you so much for all of your work, Dane. I'm going to continue sharing everything that you do to help wake people up.
Thank you for your voice in this most critical battle, Jordan.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too.